Behind every successful band, there's usually a drummer who doesn't get noticed, and right beside the drummer stands a bass player who usually doesn't get the recognition he deserves either. In the case of Lynyrd Skynyrd, there were two drummers. One of them put the band on top, and the other one kept it there until the end. Now, I'm sure most of you know that I'm talking about Bob Burns and Artemis Pyle. Those two drummers, along with bassist Leon Wilkeson, laid down the foundation for some of the greatest songs and live shows in rock history. Although not a lot has been written about them, I feel it's time to give them their due. So kick back and enjoy the video as we get into the backbone of Lynyrd Skynyrd's rebel sound, talking Bob Burns and Artemis Pyle. Bob Burns was one of the founding members of Lynyrd Skynyrd, along with Alan Collins, Gary Rossington, Larry Johnstrom, and Ronnie Van Zant. He was the drummer on the band's Pronounced and Second Helping albums, which spawned many of the group's most timeless hits, like Freebird, Simple Man, Gimme 3 Steps, and Sweet Home Alabama. Robert Louis Burns Jr. was born on November 24, 1950, in Gainesville, Florida. It was on Bob's parents' carport that the band first got together for a jam. The band would start out being called My Backyard, then the Noble Five and the 1%, before finally settling on Lynyrd Skynyrd. Bob told his story on meeting Ronnie and how the band got started. He said, "The way I met Ronnie, he knocked on my door one morning, right before school. I said, 'I don't want to fight you, man. You know?' And Ronnie said, 'I ain't here to fight.' He said, 'I'm a singer.' I said, 'You're a singer?' And he said, 'Yeah.' I said, 'I'll be danged.' I said, I got a bass player, and I had a guitar player. Why don't let's try and put something together?" This all started back in 1964. Now, they were just teenagers at the time, but as time went on, they kept at it. They started playing gigs with most of the boys still in high school, and Ronnie being the oldest, working at an auto parts store. But as the 60s turned into the 70s, the band started getting serious. They added a second drummer in Ricky Medlock. Now, some people claim Ricky's an original member, and some don't. I named you my 5 original members, and that's what I stick with. Ricky joined the band sometime around May of 1971, and sometime around there, Bob left the group for a short period. Ricky, with Larry Johnstrom and Greg T. Walker both playing bass, recorded around 10 tracks at Muscle Shoals in July of 1971. Those demos or masters, whatever you wish to call them, were shelved and turned down by quite a few record companies. They were later released after the plane crash. Ricky would be off and on with the band for a time and finally go on with Greg T. Walker with the band Blackfoot. Ricky would join the Skynyrd Tribute Band in 1996 and is still with them today doing a great job playing guitar. But in my opinion, as far as being an original member, I don't see it that way. And the comment section is open for you to express your feelings and thoughts on this subject. Bob Burns returned in January of 1972, and things would start to take off then. Leon Wilkeson was to be playing bass, and they kept working on more original music, much of which would make up the Pronounced album. But then Leon would leave, and this is where Ed King came in to take over on bass. Al Cooper had signed them to the Sounds of the South label, which was later acquired by MCA. With Bob back, there was a big improvement in the rhythm section, but by Ed's own admission, he had a lot of trouble playing and getting the proper feel to those bass lines Leon had played for all those songs. But Leon would soon return, and Ed moved over to guitar. Either way, the Pronounced album was a huge success. The album would end up going double platinum. Bob was to get his only songwriting credit on that album with the song Mississippi Kid. He said he's the one who gave it the name, and Ronnie gave him a songwriting credit. Bob Burns was to play on this album and the next album, Second Helping. But Bob had some mental issues. I've heard some say that he was just mentally fragile. And after watching the movie The Exorcist, he said it really drove him nuts. Gary Rossington said Bob thought a cat that was hanging around the hotel they were staying was possessed. and Bob proceeded to throw it out a window. But it was decided in 1974 that Bob would leave the group, that the touring and stress was just too much for him. So to replace him, Ronnie and the band chose Artemis Pyle. Artemis was born Thomas Delmer Pyle in 1948 in Louisville, Kentucky. How did he come by the nickname Artemis? He said he was going to Tennessee University in Cookeville, Tennessee, and everybody had nicknames like Snake, Woody, and Flash. He said a friend of mine, whose nickname was Snake, dubbed me Artemis because we were taking Greek mythology in one of my classes, and he came up with Artemis. I thought it was a girl's name, so I hated it. Then a show called The Wild Wild West came out with Artemis Gordon, and it was a guy, so I was okay with it after that. Following his time as a Marine Corps sergeant from 1967 to 1971, with a short stint in Spartansburg, South Carolina-based band Thickwood Lick, Artemis Pyle was recommended by Charlie Daniels and joined Lynyrd Skynyrd and replaced Bob Burns following the release of the group's second album, Second Helping. He would perform with the band on Skynyrd's subsequent 4 albums, Nothing Fancy, Give Me Back My Bullets, Street Survivors, and their live album, One More from the Road. In 1979, the band began to reunite after the 77 plane crash, first for the 5th annual Charlie Daniels Volunteer Jam, and eventually as the Rossington Collins Band, which included all the remaining band members, plus Dale Kranz on lead vocals and Barry Lee Harwood on guitar. However, shortly after the band's inception, Artemis was in a motorcycle accident that broke his leg and shattered his hopes of remaining with the group. Pyle spent the next 3 years healing, both physically and emotionally. He would start out with the Skynyrd Tribute Tour in 1987 and stay with them about 4 years. Then he would go on to form the Artemis Pyle Band to honor the music and legacy of Ronnie Van Zant. Now let's shift gears here and talk about the changeover. Both Bob and Artemis fit the group very well, in my opinion. I didn't notice much of a change in the feel of the music or the live performances, no matter which drummer was playing. I have watched and listened to them play both separately and together on stage, and I can't say which one really fit the band best. Can you? The Skynyrd sound, and especially the rhythm section, never changed and stayed rock solid. And I do give a little credit to Leon Wilkeson for that. I know we're talking about the drummers here, but the rhythm section as a whole, you have to include the bass player in there too. Both Bob and Artemis always spoke highly of Leon and his playing. So since we're shifting gears here, let me take a minute and talk about Leon before we move on with Bob and Artemis, as Leon had a lot to do with this sound and both drummers. If ever a bass player fit his group, it was Leon Wilkeson. And by that I mean his playing set in the music so well. I know when listening to a Skynyrd song, it's hard to take your attention away from those ripping guitars of Collins, Rossington, King, or Gaines, or the lyrics and vocals of Ronnie Van Zant. But if you do, you'll hear a bass guitar that sets in the music and lays down the right feel needed for them guys to make those songs move. If you believe in destiny, then this guy was born to play bass guitar for Lynyrd Skynyrd. Leon Russell Wilkeson was born on April 2nd, 1952, in Newport, Rhode Island. Then the family moved to Jacksonville, Florida, soon after Leon was born. As a teenager, Leon's interest in the bass guitar started with the Beatles and Paul McCartney. He said he was also inspired by other bassists such as Jack Bruce and Barry Oakley. One of Leon's first bands was the Collegiates, along with Donnie Van Zant, who was Ronnie's younger brother and would go on to become the lead vocalist of the group 38 Special. Leon would then join a group called the King James Version. By this time, Leon was becoming well known around the Jacksonville area as one of the better bass players. And when Lynyrd Skynyrd was in need of one, he was ready. At least playing-wise he was. But at that time, he didn't seem to have his heart in it, because when Al Cooper signed the band and things were starting to take off, Leon did just that, and headed back to Jacksonville in his job at the Farm Best Dairy Ice Cream Factory. I left the band, and they hired Ed King from Strawberry Alarm Clock to play bass, and my lifelong buddy Billy Powell they brought in on piano. Ed King also did some guitar overdubbing during Pronounced. After they finished the album, they found out I was back in Jacksonville working at the ice cream factory. The guys sent Billy and Bob Burns over to drag me over to where Ronnie was fishing. They told me they had finished the Pronounced album and that Ed King really did not want to be a bass player. He wanted to play guitar, and that they did not have the time to look around for another bass player. So they wondered if I'd oblige them and come back. I said, "When do we start practicing?" Ronnie said, "I'll see you at rehearsal tomorrow." Out of all the band members who survived the 1977 plane crash, it was Leon who probably came the closest to dying from it. Backup singer Leslie Hawkins, who was put in the same ambulance as Leon, said she remembers seeing him going into convulsions. Leon suffered multiple injuries. Reports said he suffered massive internal injuries with 6 broken ribs and 1 puncturing his left lung, dislodged teeth, a broken nose, left arm, and leg. He lost a tremendous amount of blood, and after getting him to the hospital, his heart stopped twice on the operating table. The left arm injury was of particular concern. It was his fretting arm, and his wounds had gotten infected, nearly costing him an amputation of that arm. Even after he recovered, he had severe nerve damage and minimal range of motion in it, causing him to hold his bass guitar upright for the remainder of his playing days. He would get his guitars modified so he could hold them in an upright position, and it seemed to work well for him. The Mad Hatter of Southern rock was born to play bass for Lynyrd Skynyrd. Without him holding down that bottom end, the band would not have been the same. I rate Leon right up there with the likes of Barry Oakley and Phil Lesh. I've always thought that Leon was rock solid and always had tasteful lines and great tone. And you can say this about Bob and Artemis also. Without those two guys on the bottom end, Skynyrd would never have been the same. Bob Burns created the driving beats on those first 2 albums and could take them right to the stage and keep the band rocking. Bob was a funny guy also. Many of the band's members remember him as the Joker, as he kept them all laughing all the time. He was a very important piece to the Skynyrd puzzle in the early years. Those songs on the Pronounced album might have had a different feel had it not been for Bob's playing style and drive. When Artemis took over for Bob, he did a great job live getting those early songs down and keeping the band's sound intact. His playing on the live One More from the Road album proves that. He was also creative in his beats when in the studio. Bob and Artemis were both elected to the Hall of Fame as members of Lynyrd Skynyrd. Both of them contributed to the band's sound, and both were the perfect fit. I never saw one as being better than the other. Like their bass player, Leon Wilkeson, they just fit the mold. Bob passed away in 2015 in a car accident, and Artemis, at 76 years old, still plays with his Artemis Pyle band. And if you enjoyed this video, here's another I think you might like. Thanks for watching, and smash the like button for me.